Hey everyone, it's Jeff Young, kinesiologist, and this video is the first of a series of videos on resistance training program design, where I break it down and give things more clarity as to how each repetition range should be set up. Although this one, I'm actually spanning two repetition ranges, the 13 to 15 and the 10 to 12. And the reason why is because there's a lot more similarities to program design in both of these repetition ranges. So I just thought I'd kill two birds with one stone and make things a little bit easier. But make sure you also check out my videos on the 8 to 10, 6 to 8, and 4 to 6 repetition ranges so that you can see how resistance training program design for general and special populations begins to evolve as you move from the higher repetition ranges with light loads into the middle repetition ranges with moderate loads, and then finally down to the lower repetition ranges with heavier loads. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started with this one. A linear periodized resistance training program means that the individual is moving from rep range to rep range in a linear fashion, typically in 2 to 4 week phases. For general and special populations, this usually means that following an initial familiarization phase at about 10 reps per set, the individual then moves to the 13 to 15 rep range and stays there for 2 to 4 weeks, increasing strength within that rep range, then drops to 10 to 12 reps per set for 2 to 4 weeks, progressing in strength within that rep range so that by the end of the phase, they're a little stronger in each exercise than they were in week one. Then they drop to 8 to 10 reps per set, and finally to 6 to 8 repetitions per set. This video is going to focus on general concepts and guidelines for when you're training in the 10 to 15 repetition range. In these repetition ranges, the primary adaptations occurring are local muscle endurance, which is also known as strength endurance, possible increases in lean muscle tissue, and a slight increase in strength. The individual is also maintaining or improving conditioning, stamina, and overall work capacity. But this is assuming that they're choosing loads so that by the end of the set, they are coming to at or within 1 to 3 repetitions of repetition maximum. Subjectively, taking sets to at or near repetition maximum in any repetition range feels hard because it's very fatiguing. But objectively, which means taking your perceived effort and fatigue out of the equation and just looking at the load being lifted, the 10 to 15 repetition ranges means that the loads are light to moderate. Within the overall program design, the person should include both bilateral and unilateral exercises and strengthening in each of the 3 planes of movement. But in the lower repetition ranges, from 8 or 6 repetitions per set and below, with the corresponding heavier loads, emphasis naturally leans more towards bilateral and sagittal plane exercises such as squat and deadlift variations and bilateral pulls and presses. This is why in the higher repetition ranges, while you're still going to include those exercises, the emphasis will lean more towards unilateral movements and exercises that set the joints up for when the rep ranges are lower and the loads are heavier. For the lower body, heavier intensity days should still include squat variations such as high bar squats and front squats, but they should also include multi-directional lunges. And while lighter intensity days can also include squat variations, I'd suggest placing the emphasis on split squat, lunge variations, and even single leg press. Since squats and deadlifts occur in the sagittal plane, lunges are a perfect opportunity to train the lower body in the frontal plane. So while it's fine to include forward, backward, and walking lunges, make sure to also include diagonal, walking diagonal, and side lunges. For the upper body, the 3 primary muscle groups to train are back, chest, and shoulders. With the back, on heavier days, the emphasis should be on bilateral exercises like pull-ups, barbell rows, lat pull-down, and seated rows. But they can also include unilateral exercises like dumbbell and cable rows from various angles. On lighter intensity days, emphasis should shift over to single arm rowing exercises. The chest is one muscle group where the exercises don't change much no matter what the rep range. Although in higher repetition ranges, depending on the person's strength level, they can include push-up variations. Otherwise, chest exercises should always revolve mostly around dumbbell press variations and occasionally the bench press for variety. I wouldn't recommend bench press all the time for general fitness because it can be too hard on the elbow and shoulder joints over the long term. But including barbell bench press on occasion for variety's sake is totally fine. And then for shoulders, the higher repetition ranges are the perfect opportunity to choose mostly therapeutic exercises to prepare the shoulders for lower repetition ranges with heavier weights. It's fine to include overhead press variations and wide grip upright rows, but the bulk of shoulder exercises should revolve around reverse fly variations with both dumbbells and cable machine, face pulls, 90-90 rotator cuff exercises, lateral raises, and scaptions. For the most part, on heavier days, sets should be terminated 1 to 2 reps shy of repetition maximum. And on lighter days, sets should be terminated about 3 to 4 reps shy of repetition maximum. Taking some sets to repetition maximum, which is the last repetition that could be completed with proper form, is totally fine, but most sets should be sub-max in intensity. Lastly, a total body program should include strengthening for the hips, more specifically, the adductors and hip abductors, as well as calf raises, and of course the core. There are a million ways to set up the flow of exercises in a session. Since I train mostly special populations, in other words, people who suffer from disease or musculoskeletal conditions who are just looking to feel better, be generally fit, and reduce pain or medications, the way I usually go about the workout portion is to superset between legs and back. And once we've completed those exercises, we superset between chest and hips, meaning their abductors and adductors. And finally, we superset between shoulders and calves. On the subject of sets per muscle group, think about it mostly in the sets per muscle group per week, with the goal of at least 10 sets for legs, back, and chest. If the person is only training twice per week, it's going to be tough to reach that goal because it requires at least 5 sets for legs, back, and chest in each workout. As the person moves up in frequency to 3 or more days per week, it becomes easier to reach the 10 sets per week goal for legs, back, and chest. So that's a general overview of how to set up the 13 to 15 repetition range. And while you don't need to do it exactly the way I do, I would highly suggest that in the higher repetition ranges, for legs, you incorporate multi-directional lunges. For the back, you incorporate single arm row variations. And for the shoulders, use the lighter loads as your opportunity to hit the rotator cuff and low and mid trapezius. And make sure to vary intensities during the scope of each week so that some sessions are taken closer to repetition maximum, and in some sessions, the sets are terminated a little further from repetition maximum. So I hope that gave you some general insight as to how to design programs in these higher repetition ranges. Obviously, it's impossible to cover every situation, especially with home programs or situations where the individual doesn't have access to gyms, health clubs, or any environment where there's access to traditional gym equipment such as cables, barbells, dumbbells, plates, etc. But now you understand the overall general concepts as they apply to these repetition ranges, no matter what type of atmosphere you're training in. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.